On March 8, 1976, Montgomery County Police arrived at 8103 Lilystone Drive in Carter Rock Springs, a neighborhood of Bethesda, Maryland. A neighbor had reported not seeing the Bishop family for several days. The officers didn't anticipate much from the particular call. However, when they approached the home, they noticed something immediate and undeniable. There was a trail of blood leading from the front door to the driveway, and inside the two-story home, they found more blood in each of the 4 bedrooms, as well as scattered across the inside of the upstairs bathroom. Throughout the rest of the once beautiful home, investigators discovered blood-soaked linens, mattresses, and pillowcases. They found hair, clear signs of a struggle, and carpet fibers, but there was no bodies. At that moment, investigators did not yet know that the 5 charred bodies had already been discovered days earlier in eastern North Carolina. They only knew that something catastrophic happened inside that home, and that William Bradford Bishop Jr. was missing. On the morning of March 1st, 1976, Bishop was in his office at the U.S. State Department in Washington, D.C. He had recently learned he would not receive a promotion that he had sought. And according to records, shortly after this, he told his secretary he was feeling unwell, and so he left the office early. And his last confirmed sighting was just outside the State Department building itself by a colleague, Roy A. Harold Jr., who later noted that Bishop appeared agitated.
I think I'm getting the flu. I said, well, go home. It's a long weekend and let's get together next week. He said, yeah, if there is a next week.
From there, police had to reconstruct his movements, and they reasonably believed that Bishop drove to his bank and withdrew several $100s, effectively draining his account, only a balance of approximately $400. He then drove to the Montgomery Mall, where he purchased a ball-peen hammer and a gas can. He then filled up that can and his station wagon at the gas station that was nearby. And then he drove to a hardware store and purchased a shovel and a pitchfork. And what happened next could only be reconstructed by blood patterns, by time gaps, and by what was missing. Sometime in the evening, between 7:30 and 8 p.m., William pulled back into the driveway of his home in Bethesda. To anyone watching from the outside, it would have just looked like an ordinary day. Inside, his family had no indication that anything was about to change. Investigators believe Annette, his wife, was the first to be attacked, only for him to do the same to his own mother, Lobia, as she arrived home from walking the family dog. And as a final horrific act, he went upstairs and attacked his 3 sons, William, 14, Brenton, 10, Godfrey, age 5. There was no forced entry, no intruder, only the devastating realization that the danger had been inside the house all along. And when it was over, Bishop didn't flee in a panic. He simply carried them out to the family station wagon and then began his drive south. By March 2nd, he drove roughly 275 miles to a wooded area about 5 miles south of Columbia, North Carolina. He dug a shallow hole before placing the bodies inside, and then poured the gasoline over them and set them ablaze. Thankfully, a forest ranger noticed the smoke and discovered the grave, along with the gas can, shovel, and pitchfork. The remains were identified as Bishop's wife, sons, and mother. Bishop himself was gone. His station wagon was later found abandoned near Great Smoky Mountains National Park. No body, no confirmed trace. William Bradford Bishop was not an ordinary fugitive. He was a Yale graduate, a Foreign Service officer, fluent in 5 different languages, and he was a licensed pilot. He had served in the U.S. Army and counterintelligence before joining the State Department, eventually becoming Assistant Chief in the Division of Special Activities and Commercial Treaties. He had lived overseas in Italy, Ethiopia, and Botswana. In 2014, the Federal Bureau of Investigations added Bishop to its top 10 most wanted list, believing he could still be alive. However, by 2018, he was removed, not because he was caught, but because the investigation had gone cold again. Investigators could reconstruct his movements, but movements are only mechanical. Motive is intimate. And to understand the case of William Bradford Bishop, you gotta understand the motive. And to understand the motive, you gotta understand the version of William Bradford Bishop he believed himself to be, and the version he feared he was becoming. The humiliation did not begin on March 1st. The denied promotion was only when the fracture became visible. Bishop had spent his entire life building his identity on upward motion, an elite education, international postings, and intellectual prestige. And then something new happened. He was denied an advancement. He was actually reassigned to a desk job. And at the same time, his finances were tightening. Like we had mentioned, his account balance sat at roughly $400 when he drained it, and there were actually reports of a missed mortgage payment. For many people, that is stress. For someone whose self-worth is tied to professional ascent, it can feel like exposure. Humiliation is not just disappointment, it's the realization that others may see you differently than you see yourself. And Bishop had spent his life managing how he was seen. Many years later, DNA research revealed that he had fathered a daughter from an extramarital relationship years before the murders. Her name was Kathy. I don't bring her up to prove a motive. He hadn't been publicly acknowledged at the time, but it reveals a pattern. Bishop was capable of living divided lives. The public image on one side, private reality on the other. And 16 years later, in 1992, Sheriff Earl Kite reopened the case and sent investigators back to the State Department. And there, in Bishop's personal file, they found an unopened letter. It had gotten glossed over because it had arrived after the murders and had been placed in his file by a secretary, and it remained there for 16 years. Sheriff Kite and the rest of the investigators were hopeful that the letter would contain some information pertaining to the case, or perhaps even give them a clue about where Bishop had been hiding all these years. However, when the letter was opened, surprisingly came from a convicted bank robber who had been corresponding with Bishop for years. His name was Albert Kenneth Bankston, and Sheriff Wright still believed that the letters might contain a hidden meaning, possibly even suggesting that Bishop had considered hiring a hitman. But if there was a coded message, it was far too cryptic to decipher. No confession, no instruction, no breakthrough, only ambiguity. For years, Bishop had managed to separate the versions of himself. Husband, diplomat, the pen pal to criminals, the man with secret affairs. And Bishop kept those versions coexisting until the walls between those identities started to thin. Then there's also the alleged diary that was discovered at a flea market at Greensboro Coliseum in North Carolina. It was sold for $38. Its authenticity has never been confirmed. If genuine, it discusses resentment and professional frustration. If not, it remains speculation. But even the diary's existence reflects how this crime is interpreted through humiliation and wounded pride. A more extreme theory has circulated online claiming that Bishop was involved in covert intelligence work, and he was actually killed alongside of his family in a coordinated cover up. This interpolation favors institutional wrongdoing over wounded pride, proposing a silenced operative or a government hiding its mistakes. It recasts personal collapse as systematic corruption, but there is no verified evidence of clandestine activity beyond pointing to his diplomatic service. No proof he died with his family, no documentation of a staged disappearance. If anything, the reported overseas sightings point in the opposite direction. The theory offers scale, but scale is not evidence. With everything Bishop had going on, professional rejection, financial strain, and a concealed extramarital child, all combined with his status obsessed personality, they make the perfect condition for a collapse. For Bishop, having built his entire life on prestige and forward motion, regression would not feel like part of the natural waves of life. It would feel like complete failure, like a fraud being exposed. In documented cases, family annihilators often show intense concern with perception. They do not want to be seen as declining. They do not want their children to witness failure. In their twisted mind, eliminating the family eliminates the audience. It freezes the image before it deteriorates, and they have to face the humiliation. If Bishop went into Great Smoky Mountains National Park and died, his remains have never been found. If he survived, he would now be in his late 80s. Nearly 50 years later, there is no confirmed trace, only absence. The documented facts paint an obvious picture of what happened. However, the motive was never formally established. But when you try to understand who William Bradford Bishop was, one possibility becomes difficult to ignore. He had built his life on achievement, on prestige, and on upward motion. He knew how to succeed. He did not know how to decline. Failure felt like annihilation. To William, preserving the image of the man who had it all figured out mattered more than enduring its collapse. So when he could no longer sustain it, he ended the story on his own terms. No remains, no answers, just absence. In trying to control how he would be seen, he guaranteed how he would be remembered.